And again, for those of you just joining us, there is a poll to the left-hand side of your screen. There is no submit button, simply 3 questions for response. All attendees will be muted during the presentation. If you have questions that you wish to present, please do so in the lower right-hand of your screen. You'll see the chat box. We will address as many questions as possible, time permitting, at the end of the presentation. And we'll be starting here in just a few moments. Also, should any of you be having difficulties with sound, you may find that if you enter the web presentation via Chrome, you should have availability of sound capability at that point. Okay, I think in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and begin. Welcome, bienvenidos, ni hao, aloha, and bienvenue. Thank you all for joining us today as we present an informational and hopefully educational 1-hour webinar. Our goal is to present you with ARGUS, an SGS company, some background information, current updates, a review of the soon-to-be released ARGUS standards. Again, not necessarily new, but revisions, as the audits are about continuous improvement and they are ever evolving. There are important standards that will be presented, how it will affect ARGUS-rated current operators, and the audit process in general. We're building, of course, on our long-established company in the audit and aviation safety realm. Of course, many of you have attended webinars in the last 2 months simply due to our current situation, probably more webinars than you've attended in the last couple of years, I would imagine. Understanding that many of those have been dry and boring, I hope not to disappoint today. Please allow me to introduce myself. I'll be the Master of Ceremonies today. My name is John Gravage. I am the Director of International Sales. I've been with ARGUS International for 5 years. I started as the Operations Manager for Business Aviation and Audits. Previous to that, 22 years ground operations with United Airlines in Denver and Washington Dulles. Anything that dealt with aircraft in, around, under, above, I was involved with it. 5 years at Frontier Airlines here in Denver as the manager of baggage and cargo. Again, our plan for the day is, for those of you just joining us, everyone will be muted. We'll be giving a presentation. Time permitting at the end, there will be question and answer period. You'll submit your questions via the chat box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. This will be an informational and educational presentation. The slides may not appear to be moving at a rate that you normally would see. The presenters will be discussing slides at length, and they will move as the presenters change into different areas of discussion. Again, reminder, please send any questions that you have via the chat in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. My colleagues joining me today, we have Mr. Ed Wandel. Ed joined ARGUS in 2003. He spent 10 years in operations with an on-demand charter operator. When he joined ARGUS, he managed the charter evaluation and qualification program. And then in March of 2019, Ed was named the VP of Business Aviation. Ed will be covering topics as the philosophy and history of ARGUS audits, what it means to be a platinum rated operator, and the rating changes. Also joining us today is Mr. Patrick O'Flaherty. Patrick, a former naval aviator, has 8 years as a qualified operations auditor for 5 separate audit programs. BARS, ISBEO, ACSF, ARGUS, of course. He has been 7 years as the Director of Audit Programs for ARGUS. Okay, so let's begin. Coming to us from the city of brotherly love, this gentleman puts the bourgeois in business aviation, the savoir-faire in safety. He is our Duke of Data. Please welcome Mr. Ed Wandel. Ed, take it away.
Thank you, John, for that very interesting introduction. Thanks to everybody who's on the call here. We sincerely appreciate your presence, and hopefully we'll bring you some information you can take back to your flight departments or your charter users and apply it to your next business decisions. So really, before we get into the changes that are coming in the audit standard, really kind of want to set the table by talking about really where the standard came from. We came at the audit program from a different angle than most of the other audit organizations out there. Back in late 1990s, we were tasked by several of our charter clients to do a safety analysis on charter operators. So what we did is we started looking at all the charter operators in the United States and looking at safety events, so accidents, incidents, sanction events, so fines, suspensions, and revocations and such, and really build a pretty good picture on really where the industry was at and where it was trending. So we came at this rating program really from the outside in. We were looking at the operators from the outside initially. So what we did is we built this database of information, and then recognizing the limits, with statistics, we contracted a aviation statistician from Rutgers University that came in and looked at all the stuff, because we're aviation experts. We're not necessarily math experts. So we wanted to make sure our data was right. So we were able to confirm that the data looked good, but we're also required to do some data sampling, of course, because numbers are numbers, but you really want to see what's going on inside. So what we started to do was built an audit program to go in and take a look at these operators to make sure that the data we were seeing was sound. To get us started, we hired a fellow by the name of Pete Russo. Pete's a pretty amazing guy. He's when we hired him, he was a chief pilot of JetBlue. He's held some other management positions in various airlines. But really germane to what we're looking for was he was the head of air carrier analysis at Scott Air Force Base. And he was the guy that really wrote the first DoD standard that was based on process auditing as opposed to compliance auditing. And that was great for us because we recognize that really with a compliance audit, anybody can do a compliance audit if you have a good checklist and you can go in there and make sure that you check all the boxes. But a process audit is much more difficult because what it does, it requires you to be able to look at the process and see if it really meets your standard. What that does is that puts a challenge on the audit standard itself, as well as the quality of the auditors. So we had to have a standard that was agile enough to be able to assess maybe somebody doing helicopter tours in Arizona, and also somebody flying helicopters to the oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, or landing, single engine reciprocating aircraft on gravel bars up in Alaska. And of course, what, we mostly see in charter is executive lift. Each of those things requires a different set of parameters and SOPs. And if you have just a one size fits all compliance checklist, it's really not going to work. You really want to be able to look at the processes somebody has in place and evaluate that, see if it meets your standard, which is usually safety and professionalism. So Pete was able to help us get started with that. And we're really, really lucky. We got into the audit business in 2001. And right out of the bat, we found that we had some really terrific operators that we were looking at. So one, we're validating the data that we had already collected. So we're pretty excited about that. But two is, man, some of these operators are really doing a top-notch job. We started collecting that information where these people were exceeding not only just the regulatory standards, but really setting industry best practices. And that really became the byword for the Argus audit programs, industry best practices. As I said, you can go out and get a regulatory audit, or get it audited to ICAO Annex 6, and what's going to give you good information, but that's not really what we're fundamentally about. We want to identify industry leaders, we want to identify excellent operators, and then provide that information to our vast group of users who are buying this lift. So when we did our first revision in 2003, we literally went through, found the best examples of innovative new ideas in safety management and operations and maintenance, and we applied them to the first revision. We went out there and challenged the industry to meet these standards. And of course, anytime you do that, you get a little bit of pushback, but it's been a very, very positive experience generally. With all that information we started to get, and by 2006, 2005 or so, we'd audited, conducted hundreds of these audits, and really now that information we're receiving from these audits is driving the data that we've been collecting for years and years. And when I say collecting data, I mean, I think my team looked at over 4 million pieces of data through our chart evaluation system last year. So it is a lot of data, and it's nice to have these elements that validate that. So one of the things we're trying to focus on is really highlighting the really best of the best. But what we don't want to do is make wholesale changes every couple of years. So we've kind of built this cycle for these revisions for about every 4 years. This one's took a little longer because it's a little bit more extensive. But what we don't want to do with a normal audit cycle of 2 years is to force an operator to go through a change at every cycle. So this is so we're doing this. We're talking about right now. So really, why are we here doing this? What are our qualifications? One of the big events that we had as for Argus was in 2007. We acquired PROS, Partners and Resources for Operational Safety. That was a department of United Airlines focused on conducting internal and external audits for United. These were quite simply the most experienced airline auditors in the world. We were very fortunate to bring them onto the team, and they brought a wealth of knowledge and experience, which we were able to capitalize on and bring that to our business aviation audits. So what we did is we structured our internal office to match the air carrier office, and I think we're one of the, certainly one of the largest staffed audit organizations for business aviation in the world. We've got about a dozen people that are working on various elements of your audit, whether it's the standard itself or scheduling, or we've got a team working on corrective actions as they come in. So it's really pretty comprehensive. When we brought on the PROS team, these were the largest users, our largest audit organization for air carrier, and they're one of only 6 IATA approved IOSA auditing companies. But even more interesting to the business aviation side was they're one of 2 companies that's endorsed by IATA to train auditors. And this was great for us because we were able to formalize our auditor training, and really, as part of the training events we do for the industry, we're evaluating or helping train regulators, accident investigators, hundreds of auditors. We're training our competition even, which is great because it really kind of standardizes and shares that wealth of knowledge that we have with our industry partners. So trying to get more data and more input from the operators, in June of 2011, we started the Platinum Advisory Board. What this was about a dozen top operators that had gone through our audit multiple times, and we really wanted them to put us to work. We wanted input on the standard, we wanted input on the audit process, we wanted suggestions on new focus areas, and frankly, some QA. Where can we improve? This has been a huge benefit to us, it kind of focuses our ability to really highlight the very best things that we're trying to put forth to the industry. Finally, the most recent event that really had a significant impact on our audit programs was within the last year. We were majority acquired by SGS Group. SGS is a global corporation that conducts more audits and compliance events than any other entity in the world. They've got almost 100,000 employees and over 2,000 offices and laboratories, and they really are the best of the best. We work directly with they have a really robust, and we work with them. It's an aviation assessment department, and they primarily focus on the resource industry. So it was a really great merge of our, more executive lift focused expertise and their, real global resource generated operational experience. It was terrific. So it was a natural fit. And really the only changes that affected us were just, we grew the knowledge base, and we adopted, or in the process are adopting some of their processes and systems. They have they've been doing this for over 100 years. They're headquartered in Geneva in Switzerland, and they've developed some great tools over those years. So we're looking forward to, increasing our ability to work with their tools and increase our ability to work with them specifically. So again, kind of going back to what the mission and the purpose of this is we want to highlight the very best. We could stand up an audit program and set it up so we could audit all 1,900 operators in the United States that hold a 135 charter certificate. But that's really not where we see our focus and expertise. We really want to focus on the very best and then share that information and really kind of help the industry move forward with adopting these industry best practices. We're far ahead of the FAA. I don't have to tell you guys that, one of these years will actually make safety management systems a requirement, hopefully in my lifetime. But we've actually had that as part of our audit standard since 2001. Across the hall from us here at Argus in the Denver office, we've got the PRISM organization, PRISM business unit. They're safety management focused and really are the industry leaders there. So they share information with us, and we share information with them, so we can, keep pulse on what new innovations are coming out in safety management. And finally, internally, as Patrick's going to talk about, we're constantly reviewing and improving the standard. A lot of these things you won't see because they're all being done behind the scenes, but we're testing things constantly, making sure that some of the changes we make are going to work, and trying to make it easier for the operators to adopt these new processes. So what does all that mean? What does Platinum really get you? It means you meet or exceed industry best practices. Again, this isn't a compliance audit. We expect you to be legal. If we find an illegality or a regulation's not being met, we'll certainly point it out, but really we're going to focus on industry best practices. If you strike for Platinum, but you don't want to or can't complete a element of the standard, you can still benefit with a Gold Plus rating. And what that means is that you just didn't meet or exceed all the industry best practices. You may, for whatever reason, decide not to do full motion simulator training, for example, because of financial constraints. So you could still attain Gold Plus, which still puts you in a group of audited entities. We've got a lot of operators that will only use an ARGUS audited company. So you'd still benefit from the revenue sources there. Also, with the Argus rating, you know what you're getting. I came from 10 years in the 135 industry, and we'd have to, supplement lift, and I'd call somebody up and I'd ask the operator if they had a safety management system, and they'd say, "Yep, I got one right here. I bought it last year." And you have no idea if they've ever opened it or played with it or done anything with it. With an Argus Platinum rated operator, that's because we've been in there and checked, and we've looked at the data, sometimes almost daily from these operators. We push out our ratings to dozens of folks. There's thousands of users that rely on it. Really, if we can do anything for you, I think that's one of the best things we can do, is just brag about who we have audited and the things we found. So from an operator standpoint, it's an additional benefit. You can benchmark where you are versus the rest of the industry. If you're you kind of think you're doing it right, have us come in. We can take a look and tell you where you are in relation to your industry peers. And that's something, we don't do too many audits where we come out of it and say, oh, everything was perfect. There's always something that needs to be talked about, and maybe some recommended practices and And again, from that information, we also learn too, and all that system all that comes back into the system. So it just continues to improve everything. So it's really like a community. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Like I said, like John said before, please put some questions in the chat. If there's too many and we run out of time, we'll put something together for you and get information out to the attendees. And with that, I'm happy to pass this back off to John, who's going to take you through really what the audit process looks like. Thank you.
Hey, thanks a lot, Ed. Appreciate it. Well done. So in my previous life, after starting with Argus, I worked, as I mentioned, as the operations manager, working with and scheduling audits and preparing operators for either their initial audit or their renewal audit. Most importantly, we're looking at preparation, advanced preparation, as much as you can apply, whether it's an initial or a renewal. We recommend looking at least 60 days out, if not further. Planning, preparing, getting your manuals ready, making sure that they're approved. We can only audit to approved manuals. Don't want to have an audit team show up on site and find out that they're working with manuals that are in revisions. Then the audit preparation gets down to when we're about 21 days out from the on-site audit where your team is going to be arriving. Our operations manager will notify you. They'll provide you the details of the audit team, flight operator, maintenance auditor, and they will begin communication with you to get the necessary documents in advance for review so that they can apply more work on implementation when they arrive on site. Anything we can get done in advance is going to provide for a better on-site audit. In the audit itself, your team of 2 will show up the day before, prepared for the 2-day audit. That audit will be reviewing any questions that they may have with concerns to your manuals. It will entail interviewing personnel, so you'll want to make sure that the appropriate personnel are ready and available during that on-site audit. It will require some sort of a site inspection and an aircraft inspection. A lot of those things during the on-site will happen. Then we move in towards the closing meeting in the end. We'll get to the next slide here momentarily. So after the closing meeting, before they leave, the lead auditor will present you with the findings and observations and an idea of what's going to happen now moving beyond the closing meeting. They will then send their executive report to our team in Denver in our audit production area. That will be reviewed. It'll go through a quality process. The audit production, if they have questions of the lead auditor, they'll go back and forth. And then at that time, you'll be presented with a corrective action report. And it will guide you through what you're going to do with any findings that there may have been or observations. If for those few exceptional operators that have no findings, your audit will probably be closed within 30 to 45 days. And you'll have your audit report. For those that are going to go through the corrective action process, you can plan on probably 90 to 120 days to complete those corrective actions. Again, you're going to be working with an experienced team that is going to be going back and forth with you. You'll be presenting your manual changes, your implementation, and they'll accept them or they'll give you some guidance as to what they're looking for, how close you are, things of that nature. And then once the 120 days has expired, we hope that all the corrective actions have been completed. The audit will be closed and you'll be presented with your final audit report and your recommendation for a rating of platinum or gold plus. And that is the audit timeline. A real quick overview of that. So now we're going to move on to my colleague who's going to address the changes to the standard. He's coming to us live from a city that doesn't understand social distancing here in Denver, Castle Rock, Colorado. This gentleman puts the F and the O in findings and observations. He's the Sultan of Standards, Mr. Patrick O'Flaherty. Patrick, take it away. Now, I know you were working, Patrick. We had a mic check earlier. There it goes. I think we're getting you. Are you active, Patrick? I think I got you now. Is that you, Patrick?
That's me.
There you are.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. It's not. I don't do webinars every day, fortunately. But yes. So thank you, everybody, for joining the call today. We appreciate you taking the time. We want to express that we're very excited to issue this revision. It's as John and Ed have said, it's a culmination of a lot of hard work and data gathering. And so what we've done is over the past few years, we collect the inputs from our operators and auditors and the business aviation community in general. You never know where you're going to get inputs from. And so that's where we have been taking input for revisions to our standards. Now this revision, it's going to, this revision we think will improve the flow of standards. It does broaden the number of standards that we do have, but it also importantly clarifies many of our earlier standards. The other thing that we have done is we're going to be issuing our first version of guidance material, and we will be issuing that on an iterative basis. As we get inputs, we will be providing that information. So the first thing I wanted to do with you is talk about new standards and revised standards. And so the first one is a term I think that's probably quite familiar to everybody, which is a new standard for a stabilized approach. What we're saying in the standard is that we're going to require a definition of a stabilized approach policy so that you minimize the loss of control, avoid CFIT, and reduce the possibility of runway excursions. And this is a topic that is very important, and so we're happy to have incorporated this standard because there are statistics are pretty shocking about some of the unstabilized approaches that they have resulted in 60% of unstabilized approaches were a causal factor in 60% of approach and landing accidents and incidents from 84 to 97. So there is a statistical backup to this as to why we added this directly as a standard. And as you can imagine, the folks in the audience, there's a good number of examples out there, including the Lear 35 and that crashed in 2017 near Teterboro, HS 125 in 2015 impacted an apartment building. I'm sure people remember that, as well as a Challenger 600 accident here in the great state of Colorado in Aspen. So those are some of the examples that we would offer to you as a case study as to why we added the standard. And so the next item that I want to talk to you about is our simulator standards. This is one that we have revised for clarity. We have added some additional standards that clarify our expectations, but also allow for some operators don't have ready access availability to a simulator. We've defined that. So what we're saying in the standard is that we're going to use flight training devices or motion-based simulators for PICs and SICs annually, if the simulators are available. And so what we've defined the availability is if you can get to a simulator within a day's travel from your main location, and then that the PICs and SICs would have to complete a simulator training for each aircraft that requires a type rating or uses turbine engines. And so what we're doing there is that we have looked at the FAA and EASA information, and that has provided a ready reference of those aircraft that require a type rating And so that will be, that I think has added a lot of clarity. And then if at the point where you do not have a simulator available, we are going to be accepting a approved in-flight in-aircraft training syllabus. So that for our customers is a fairly major revision in of itself. But again, we're trying to make sure that we have clearly communicated our expectations for what we see as a very challenging standard. So the next item that I wanted to mention is again, it's a revised standard for safety risk profile. This is one that we have felt that this is one of the best tools that an operator can have, small or large. Basically, it is an accounting for what is your risk. So the way that we have changed it is that ordinarily our previous standard did not require a post-mitigation assessment. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be expecting that you do basically a list, you do a survey of list all of your practices that are identify all the risk in your organization, and then calculate what is the severity, likelihood and severity of that. And then after the company applies what mitigations they have in place for those risks, you do another evaluation, which then indicates hopefully a mitigation that's acceptable to you. One of the reasons that we like this is it gives the operator, particular leadership in the organizations, a good view of the total amount of risk that they are facing. And we've talked with a number of operators that are surprised by some of the risk that they have identified internally when completing these evaluations. So this is, although a fairly minor change, we felt it was important to do this. So the next item I wanted to talk with you today about is our revised standards for vendor oversight in maintenance. What we did is we revised standards to help operators identify and account for risk presented by outside providers. And it helps to ensure that your quality expectations and your customers' quality expectations are met. And so essentially what we're saying is that your maintenance needs to be ensuring that for some of our standards that they have an ability to assess what the vendor is providing them. Are the parts of been stored properly? Do they have proper procedures internally so that you can feel confident that they produce that part or that service in the way that you would expect? And I think one of the reasons we did that was the best example of how a vendor can cause issues, I think, is the ValueJet crash in 1996, Flight 592. So there's rationale behind this that is strong, and we think it will end up accounting for risk in your maintenance organizations that perhaps you did not appreciate previously. The next item that I wanted to talk about is we've revised our standards for ground handling. We've added some guidance material. And so what we've done here is that, we see that the ground handling procedures are documenting those have been very beneficial. But they've been very beneficial. But one of the areas that has not had as much emphasis is when you are operating away from your home base. So when you're operating, you've sent crews on a trip and they're going to a location. Ideally, you would have some mechanism to ensure that the people that are going to be handling your aircraft are trained and qualified to handle your aircraft. And so I think when we were researching this topic, there was an awful lot of information there that really did surprise us in regards to the amount of damage, the cost for this. to operators throughout the world. And we saw one study that states that business aircraft operators are 800 times more likely to damage aircraft during handling than in an accident. And the estimates of the cost of the ground damage are as high as $1 billion annually in indirect costs. But there's also indirect costs from these incidents that perhaps some people don't fully account for, and that is indirect cost would be, you don't have access to that aircraft while it's being fixed. So there's a lost revenue. There may be some unplanned expenses. There may be some legal requirements, etc. So we have felt that this is an area that needs to be emphasized and with proper processes and procedures. And then the last, just a moment. Yes, so the, just a moment. Okay, so what we have done also is we have revised and included some new best practices, new recommended practices. In particular, for the first one that we have added in is for maintenance check flights. This is an area that, as you might imagine, that the risks are higher in this area because, perhaps you're intentionally shutting down a system, or you're evaluating infrequently used systems. You need to be prepared for a lot of different contingencies that you may not encounter on just a standard logistics flight. So what we've done is we've included some new recommended practices that try to mitigate the risks linked to maintenance check flights, but also that they focus on crew selection, check flight planning, and check flight procedures. The next item that I have for you that we have a new recommended practice is flight data monitoring. Now, flight data monitoring is one that is permits the download and analysis of flight recorder data on a regular and routine basis. And so you have the ability to analyze that data for proactively as a measure of safety oversight, and then allows you to quantify the hazards and the situations that occur in your operation, and so you can make some informed decisions. Now, this is a recommended practice now. One of the barriers to implementation of this fully is the cost that is involved. So that is why we have this as a recommended practice, but hopefully over time, adoption of these types of systems and capabilities will improve. And then the last item, the last recommended practice that I wanted to mention to you is just the fatigue management. We have several new recommended practices, and basically to address the effects of fatigue globally. A survey that we found that revealed that above 50% of operators consider fatigue a serious concern. And a couple data points here that we thought were interesting as well that I had not seen before, which is the NASA reports have stated that up to 20% of accidents, aviation accidents, have fatigue causal factors. And then the NTSB says that it's 88% of aircraft mishaps. So this is certainly a problem area. Again, we do have new recommended practices for it, and so hopefully that those recommended practices will be a benefit to you. Okay, so yes, and so the next item I wanted to go through with you is just our new standard, how it's going to be implemented, and when you can expect to see it. What the revised standards will be, we will be issuing no later than the 1st of July. And that's basically as a heads up for our operators so that you have time to make any changes, etc., before an audit. And so the next timeline is that if you are a renewing operator, after July the 1st, you will have the ability to either use the existing ARGUS standard or the revised standard from the period 1 July to September 30th. All new operators will, during that period, new operators will use the new standard. And then as of 1 October, it will be our full implementation date for the new ARGUS Audit Standard. Excuse me, revised ARGUS Standard. So thank you again for your time today. That's all I really had for you, but again, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to us today, and I hope that we've given you some helpful information. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. I have feverishly been scrambling through the chat boxes to try and capture as many of these questions as possible. We are, again, going to try and address as many. We've allotted about 1 hour time. So the first one is that I've seen quite frequently is it possible to have a copy of this presentation? Yes. With the contact information that all of you provided to us, that presentation, a copy of it will be available next week and will be distributed to you. It'll be sending out a link to the recording and the slides early next week. Another question that came about was, are there any thoughts on virtual audits given the current pandemic? And yes, we already have established a remote audit capability, as have most audit programs. The ARGUS audit does have a remote audit capability. It is limited. Patrick, I'll go ahead and ask you to elaborate a little bit on that. And I have added a bit to this question that I think probably will help in answering. Patrick, with the remote audit capability, who is eligible?
Okay,
yep,
there we go. Sorry about that. So it really depends on the audit program.
I think the question was addressing the ARGUS Audit Standard. So if someone is interested, if they're doing a renewal audit, our remote capability, we do have. Who's eligible?
Yes. Okay. So if for the ARGUS Audit Standard, we are doing some remote audits for existing customers. Now, a remote audit is a little bit of a misnomer in that we will not, for the ARGUS audit, we will do currently for our current customers, when we're not able to get to them we're not able to get out and audit them. We have done some remote auditing of them to extend their rating. Now, we also have the ability to, obviously the on-site audits, we are anticipating that they'll be coming back. But I think the remote audits are slowly going to be decreasing in the number as we go forward in this process. It is not our intention to use virtual audits as a standard practice. We have to do our due diligence of operators. So I hope I've answered the question.
In my mind, you have, yes. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next one. As SMS is the core of the ARGUS Audit Standard and success depends on leadership's buy-in of the program, are there plans, something to the effect of a quick assessment or a checklist, as a supplement to the ARGUS Standard to rate leadership performance during an on-site visit, that indeed SMS is active throughout the operation? Patrick, I'm thinking that that's probably one for you.
Yeah. Yes. So SMS is certainly a major part of our audit, and we do have some additional standards. No, we have not considered a quick assessment or checklist to supplement the AAS to rate leadership performance. We have tried to keep our audit reports as empirical as possible. And so the concern that we would have would be this, perhaps some of the subjective judgment that might go into that. So we understand the question, but we have not done that for leadership. However, as we mentioned before, if you have a suggestion, something that you would like to see, we have a lot of great people that could work to develop something that would meet your needs.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Let's see. This one I think we've already addressed. Will these standards be available to those who use ARGUS? Yes, you did that in the implementation plan timeline. See another question. Is ARGUS considering publishing any trends on findings to a broader group? It would be helpful for safety management to see what common findings from ARGUS audits, all de-identified information, that would allow us to use introspectively and apply some safety assurance checks as a corollary program, and then use SRM to make adjustments if you find a concern.
I can jump in on this one, John. So the short answer is that we already produce a report based on some findings through our PRISM team. So I think we could probably tweak that or review that and come up with something beneficial to all the users that follows what kind of Cheryl's looking for there. So I've got a note to follow up on that, and I'll reach out to her. And of course, we have the attendees' contact information, and we can publish the findings to this group here. Hope that answers the question.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ed. This next question might be another one for you. Can operators that meet Platinum or Gold Plus be given some credit, perhaps on a % on flight time, for pilots? Because even though an operator has Platinum or Gold Plus showing that we are doing best practices, crews can still not meet the standard based on an hour requirement instead of safety.
Another great question. That's a great thing about being in aviation. We have a bunch of smart people with us. Yeah, so that's a great question. And we have a program that we've launched over the last couple of years called Gateway. And what that is it's taking Platinum and Gold Plus operators, looking at their pilot training and their crewing, and how they go through the operations with their air crew, and we can give credit to pilots' experience under criteria, certain criteria. So we've already launched the SIC Gateway, which allows expertise that the pilot receives from external sources. So the military, for example, Aeronautical University or ab initio airline programs. And we're in the process of rolling out to a beta group ones that recognize the internal training that you give. We can do, for an example, let's say you have an air crew that is flying a global, and they're transitioning into a G650. If the avionics suite is the same or similar, we're working on ways that we can credit the air crews for that similarity. We're also doing with similar aircraft types. Whereas we've always been focused on the FAA type ratings, they're pretty loose and they change pretty arbitrarily. So we've had situations like, for example, with the Falcon series of aircraft, somebody wouldn't be able to transition between a Falcon 2000 to a Falcon 2000 EZ when, frankly, the EZ is easier to fly. So we're working on things like that. Any questions specific to Gateway? what we do is it's got to be an ARGUS audited entity. So we wouldn't be comfortable with a gold rated operator because we really don't know what their training programs are like. We do know what your training programs are like if you've gone through this audit process. So reach out to us directly, and we can look at it, the specific questions you have regarding that. It's not a one size fits all. We're still in the beta phase of rolling this out, and we're looking at each operator individually. So we're happy to do it. Just give us an email and we'll get started.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ed. One other question that came in, is this the first revision in the past 4 years? I believe at the beginning of the presentation, Patrick had mentioned that, yes, this is a significant revision that's been posted in the last 4 years. We've had some intermittent, minor changes to some of the standards, but as far as a significant change, yes, this is the first in the last 4 years. Patrick, would you agree with that assessment?
Yes. Yes, I would.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thanks. I try to take as many as I can. I'm doing the best.
Thank you.
Another question that came was, it appears as though the question is, can the ARGUS standard be used instead of IOSA? The answer to that would be is if your intent is becoming a member of IATA or non-member of IATA, you have to have the IOSA audit conducted. This is not a supplement to that. Okay, another question. How can I measure or control the fatigue of maintenance personnel if my service is outsourced? Patrick?
Well, I think by the evaluation of that vendor, of that maintenance vendor, you have some type of agreement or contract with them where you can specify what your expectations are. And part of that, what we would suggest, is done through a vendor audit or a similar mechanism to allow you to assess what that operator is doing to make sure that it is in line with your program. So I think that it would be incumbent upon you to just make sure that you're engaging with that operator and checking them periodically to ensure that they're doing what they said they would do. So I hope I've answered your question. It's if not, please let me know and I will speak with you directly. Thank you.
Okay, and another question that's come in. How do you manage the ISBEO Stage 3 operator since the renewal is on a 3-year cadence? And again, Patrick, I think I might be able to take that one. You can jump in at any time. Actually, the 3-year cadence, I believe, is going to be with ISBEO an option if, as many of our operators do, that do the combination ARGUS and ISBEO audits. Those, of course, are going to be on a 2-year cycle because the ARGUS audit is on a 2-year cycle. You can simply choose to continue to conduct your ISBEO registration Stage 3 on a 2-year cycle. Financially, that makes sense. Otherwise, you'd be having an audit every year and paying for 2 separate audits.
I'd just like to jump in here too, as well, John. Just ARGUS as a auditing company, we based all our audit standards on IOSA. I'm sorry, on ISO. So we're an ISO company, and the ISO standard is 2 years. That's why we put 2 years. It wasn't an arbitrary number. And so we're really not comfortable extending our audits to 3 years because it goes against that standard. But as John mentioned, that you have some options in there on your own side for scheduling. But I hope that answers that question.
Okay, hang on. I'm sifting through some questions to make sure that we've got them all. I believe I might have missed one. We have an approved CAMP and CAS, which also integrates vendor audits. How will the ARGUS audit be different than the standard for the 10-element compliance and CAS? Patrick?
Okay. Just a moment. Okay, so I'm trying to keep up with your question. There's a fair amount there.
Here, I'll go ahead and let me
That
go
the
through it.
camp and CAS?
Yes. You want
Yeah,
that one, Nick?
so the auditors would go in and look at the
Yes.
programs that the operator has in place, and camp and CAS, they're pretty robust with regard to ground handling, and so since this is a process audit, we'd be able to evaluate what you're doing for oversight and accept that as appropriate. Does that make sense?
It certainly did to me.
Well, the other thing that I would add is, we generally have a philosophy that we will tell you what to do to meet the standard, or we'll give you the standards for you to review, but we're not going to tell you necessarily how to do that. That is something that should be a result of your internal processes and deliberations. So if it is documented in your manuals, you have it implemented in your programs, that would typically meet the criteria.
Okay, great. We did have a clarification on the previous IOSA question. So your organization is not intending to become member or IOSA registered operator. The ARGUS standard is a great standard to audit your company against. Yes, is the answer to that question. You can also be audited, even if you don't want to be an IOSA registered operator, you can certainly be audited to the IOSA standards. We are certified to conduct IOSA audits. We can send a team in, and we can also customize an audit to meet your needs. So there's many opportunities to come in. The fact that you're wanting an audit is simply the best thing that you can do. And then how can we best meet those needs? There's several ways to do it. The ARGUS standard. There's not much out there that we can't audit against, as Ed had mentioned earlier. I hope that answers the question. There might be, I think what you're looking at, Ed, did you have an additional thought on that?
I'm not quite sure exactly what Jose is looking for, but we'll be happy to contact Jose offline and make sure we know what he's talking about and answer his questions specifically. And if it's useful for the rest of the group, we'll share it with the group.
Great. Okay, and looks like we are just about coming up on time here for our 1 hour period. Let me see if we can possibly take one more question. Let's see what it is here. Is it acceptable to work with specific audit teams based on their availability, or are they assigned randomly? Patrick.
Okay. Well, yes, we try and take into account an operator's preference for auditors. We do understand that there can be a connection that you get with your auditor. However, we also do get concerned about applying the same auditor again and again and again. We feel like we should try and rotate auditors, and as a matter of fact, in many of the audit programs now, rotation of the auditors is required typically after the second audit. So it is a best practice to rotate auditors. We do see the value in it for the customer to be able to use the same auditors, but we also, we want to make sure that we are evaluating you without any type of bias or what have you. And so, we can honor those requests, but it is not a guarantee. I hope that answers the question.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. Very good question there. We do get that quite a bit from operators. Okay, so in the interest of time, I think we've addressed as many of the questions as possible. We were actually pretty good at most time. We'll put together a list on what we were able to answer, as well as those that we weren't, and we'll be sending those out. There was one other item that I wanted to look at. One moment, please bear with me. Okay, so a couple of the items that we'll close with, some of the interesting points that we had as we started this. We asked a few polling questions. It's very good to see that the attendance was fulfilled by many operators. So that's great to see that there was an interest for those of you out there that are either looking at getting an ARGUS audit or looking at your ARGUS renewal. That we understand you're active, and as I had mentioned previously, you want to prepare as much in advance. So this is great. Auditors that are out there getting awareness to the upcoming standard changes. There'll be training that'll be posted and available for that. Charter providers, it's great to see you that have joined us so that you have an understanding of the ARGUS standards and what it means to your clients and selling your business and selling the product. And then there's the others. Thank you for joining. I'm not quite sure what you got out of this, but we appreciate your attendance. I see many of you were ISBAO rated. We have a few BARS rated operators. We even had an IATA safety standard assessment operator, a couple of ISBAs. We had some IOSA operators in attendance, ACSF, great to see you folks as well. And then customized, a lot of people that have customized. Again, that's what we do. This is our business. If it's not an audit standard that we audit to, which we audit to, as you heard earlier, over 8 different standards. So our capabilities are immense. And we can customize to your needs as well. So with that, in closing, it has been our pleasure to be with you for this hour today. I understand in today's environment, things are challenging, things are difficult. We're having to face new ways of doing business. So the fact that you've taken the time out is greatly appreciated to do that with us today. I wish that you stay healthy, stay safe, and as always, ARGUS is going to remain dedicated to our business aviation community and our efforts in maintaining our specialized due diligence with our aviation partners. Thanks once again, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.